All right, guys, we're going to get started. Just wanted to take 1 second to let everybody know that Tim with Milford TV is recording for us tonight so that this can be played back for everyone in the community. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Matthew Zakili. I'm the current chair of the school committee. And over here to my right, we have Michael Agajanian, vice chair, and then Principal Joshua Ottland and Superintendent Dr. McIntyre. The only thing I wanted to say before we really get started today is I want to emphasize the profound impact that this project is going to have for our community. I had the pleasure of going to Attleboro High School, which is about a year old, and seeing what a comprehensive modern high school can look like. And as much as this building has done for our community, seeing the design, the open floor plans, the collaboration spaces, and what Chapter 74 programs bring to our students and to the lives and the possibilities of those students going through those halls and through those classrooms was astounding. And one of the things I wanted to read here that one of their educators shared with me was that their high school wasn't just what they called an educational hub, but it was a spot that was a catalyst for growth, empowerment, and unity in their community. And it was something that brought a lot of pride and belief in their students and in their faculty alike to take that building and make it a centerpiece for the entire community and for the entire educational platform. So I'm personally excited to explore the possibilities that we have with a project like this. It's a long road. We have 5, 6, 7 years to move along, and there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, but this is the first step. So I'll let Dr. McIntyre take off with the next couple slides.
All right, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. We're competing with the Bruins playoff game, so I appreciate you guys making the choice to be here. This process began, I'd say, about 8 years ago, and Al and I, who's on the FinCom, was here in the back, have had many conversations about, once we finish one school, we need to start thinking about the next school. And the process began with the conclusion of the Woodland Building Project, which is just about 8 years old this year. We developed a long-range facilities plan. We got input from a lot of different stakeholders and identified the high school as the highest priority based on the age of the facility, the condition of the major systems, and the changing educational needs from when the building was originally built in the 1970s. We then submitted a statement of interest 3 years ago to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And for folks that aren't familiar with this process, in Massachusetts, they put a process together in an organization called the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which basically oversees all major school construction across the state. Why districts and communities want to participate in this program is because the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, I'm going to use that acronym because it's a mouthful, provides a significant reimbursement to communities. And as Matt was talking about kind of the potential for huge change, the great potential with this project. If people remember the old Woodland building with the open classrooms, and I have attention issues myself, so when I was, Bob Tremblay and I were in there observing classes, and I was having a hard time focusing between the 2 or 3 classrooms that were connected to each other. And to see what Woodland became, which is a modern building, phenomenal natural light, the ability for collaboration, it's just amazing. It's just amazing. And you can't help but walk in that building and just smile. And the students just love it. And we're looking forward to a similar project here. So 3 years ago, we submitted our first statement of interest. And unfortunately, well, let me talk about what a statement of interest is first. A statement of interest is the first required step in the process from the MSBA. And what the statement of interest is it's basically you are giving all the details on the building. You're talking about the age of the windows, the condition of the roof, the plumbing system, electric, the doors, how many classrooms there are, what the square footage is, what types of programs are served in the building. And we currently house our 9 through 12 students here, our Shining Star preschool program, as well as we have a program for special needs students 18 to 22. So we put this big document together, and what typically happens the first time you submit it is you get a rejection from the MSBA. They say, thanks, but no thanks. And so, we expected that, and we submitted again the second time. And the second time we submitted, a team from the MSBA came out and did kind of a deep dive and a little more due diligence with looking at the school, looking at the facilities. They had one of the people that came over walked around with a GoPro so we could get pictures of everything in the building. We did kind of a walk through all the classrooms, and then the boiler room and all the different electrical rooms in the building. So they got a flavor of like what was the condition of the building, what were some of the needs. They asked us a lot of pointed questions, and then they came back and said, "Thanks but no thanks," which was also to be expected. Then we submitted for the third time, and this year they accepted us into what's called the eligibility period. And I actually was not expecting to be invited in this year. I was expecting it to take a couple more times. I think it took Woodland, 7 or 8 tries to get the MSBA invited into the eligibility period. So very excited that we're in the process right now. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We're just going to review the project broadly. We're going to talk about the process. We're going to talk about what the eligibility period means, and there's 9 deliverables connected to that we have to complete as part of that process. We're going to talk about what a feasibility study is, because you hear that word bantered about, and what does that mean? And then we're going to open it up for questions. And I'm hoping the presentation goes 15, 20 minutes, and you have an opportunity to ask us a bunch of questions. And hopefully we can answer most of them. Nobody on this panel is an expert in the MSBA process, but we're all learning. I've been involved at the beginning of a building project years ago when I worked in Tewksbury for a high school, and I was very involved in the second half of the Woodland project. So I am very conversant in this process, but again, things shift over time, and we'll talk about some of those things too. So why was the high school the project that was selected? The building was built in 1971, which coincidentally was the year I was born. Aging infrastructure and failing systems, roof, plumbing, heating, electric. You've heard about the leaks in the roof if you've been paying any kind of attention to what's happened at Milford High School. And all these systems are aging and getting to the point where they're obsolete. One of our challenges, whenever we have an issue that we have to fix in the building, is it's very difficult to get parts, because a lot of the systems are just so old. Space issues. We've added about 500 new students across the Milford Public Schools this past year. Thanks to the community, we added a 6th classroom addition at Brookside Elementary School, which has been fantastic. We've also, in every one of our buildings, captured every space we can for classroom space, and we're basically at the limit for that. Now, and the good news is we've been pretty stable for about the last 18 months in terms of student population. We had a big jump for about 4 or 5 years, and for about the past 18 months we've been pretty stable. I think last year we started at a number and we were 6 students fewer or more than we were from the beginning of the school year. So my hope is that we're starting to stabilize, because we're running out of space. We've actually run out of space. The last piece is the design does not meet the requirements of current educational needs. So we have a lot of different needs today than we did when the building was built in the 1970s. Education was very different. We've adapted a lot of spaces to meet kind of current educational needs, but we're fitting a lot of round pegs and square holes, or square pegs and round holes. So the second part of the process, the first part is submitting the statement of interest and getting accepted. The second part of the process is the eligibility period. And what happens in the eligibility period, you basically have 270 days to do 9 things. And we're going to walk you through what those 9 things are. Our eligibility period starts on August 1st. The state invited a number of projects in, but they staggered when the projects would be starting. And I think mercifully, in some respects, we have kind of a lot of runway to get a lot of this done prior to the eligibility period in the beginning, and we've been doing a lot of work around that. So these are the 9 things that you have to do. The first is the initial compliance certification, and we had to do basically the same thing when we submitted the statement of interest. That means the town manager, select board, the superintendent, chair of school committee all have to sign off to say, this is a project that the community can get behind, basically. It's basically saying, we understand what a building project entails, and we believe there's support in the community to make that happen. Now, there's a number of votes that have to happen along the way. There's a vote that we're going to be taking in May that we're going to talk about in a little bit around a feasibility study, and then there's a number of votes around funding that happen later in the process. Forming the school building committee. The school building committee is basically the project management team for the building project. So they're managing the budget, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, has very specific folks that have to be on that committee, and then there's some flexibility for the community to maybe add a person or two, or we'll talk about that in a little bit. After I get through this list, I'm going to have Principal Otland, who's actually now Dr. Otland. He just recently earned his doctorate. He's going to talk about that, which is you're basically explaining like, what's the academic program that you currently have, and what's the academic program you'd like to see in the new building. Similarly, Chapter 74, which is just the basically the legal definition for career and technical education. We're seeing a greater demand for vocational, career, and technical education from our students, and it's something we're going to look at both from a programmatic perspective and from a design perspective, because we've had some interest in maybe bringing some programs in, and we just don't have the space to make it work. Online enrollment projection and enrollment meeting held. This is basically, and this is where we're a tricky community when it comes to that, because a lot of our enrollment change hasn't been driven by the Burson Milford Hospital or the new building that's happening in the community. A lot of our new families and students are coming from places other than Milford. They're coming from other towns, they're coming from other states, they're coming from other countries. So we're gonna have that discussion when we talk about the enrollment process, because our enrollment has been a little unpredictable for the last decade. Now again, it's been stable for the last 18 months, but we could see 100 students walk through the door next week. And we welcome everybody who walks through the door, and we support everybody, but there's a little bit of uncertainty with our enrollment. Maintenance and capital planning information, they're basically looking for what's the maintenance program for the school, what's the short and long-term capital planning process for the community. Both those things are done very well by Milford, both historically and currently. And so I see that as, there's just a lot of documentation you have to put in place. Local vote authorization, that's what we're hoping to have happen in May to move forward the feasibility study. And again, what the feasibility study looks at is a number of things, but they look at, are you going to do a new building? Are you going to do a renovation? One of the questions we're going to ask as part of our feasibility study is bringing the 8th grade over to open up space across the district, basically. And what are some of the ramifications connected to that? And they look at everything from where could a new high school be built, what are some of the challenges around building versus renovating, and they look at what's going to be the best value for the community and for the state, and what's going to meet the needs that we're outlining in our educational profile, our Chapter 74 technical education, viability documentation, our enrollment, both current and projected. All those things kind of play into it. It's a very complicated process. And I think, Al, what are we looking at? Maybe 2.5 million is the request at town meeting?
It was till you said it could be 2.7.
Sorry.
What we want to do is we're not going to spend the full amount. We just want to make sure we have the money to meet the cost of whatever the project is. And one thing that's been happening on the construction side, the folks who have been paying attention in the news, is that a lot of projects, they thought were going to cost a certain amount, and they've ended up costing a lot more because of materials, kind of during the pandemic. The state has luckily jumped in a lot of those projects, and I think, again, I'm hopeful that that is starting to stabilize, so we're not seeing kind of wild inflation rates on things like steel and some of the construction materials. At this point, I'm going to have Josh jump up and just kind of talk a little bit like what our process has been so far for the educational profile questionnaire and some of the tires we're taking with the Chapter 74 program.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Dr. McIntyre. I'll try to be relatively brief, and if folks have questions about anything I say in particular, we can get into that into the question stage. So we've convened a team of 60 members of our faculty and administrators to start having a series of conversations about our hopes and dreams for the new building. And the content that's coming out of those conversations is going to help inform a document that I will ultimately draft, which tries to synthesize a lot of the ideas that are emerging from these conversations and tries to pull them all together into a coherent educational vision for the new building. I want to share with you sort of some of the emerging themes that have come out of our conversations thus far. I think the first theme is that there's a recognition that Milford High School is much more than a high school, that it is a community center, and we want to make sure that in the future, Milford High School not only remains a community center, but is even a more robust community center than it presently is. So that this is a facility that can support an academic program for adolescents, that can support a wide range of extracurricular programs for adolescents, that can support a wide range of extracurricular programs for youth and adults throughout the community, including adult education. This is a facility that historically has been used by the community most weeks, 6 to 7 days a week, for somewhere between 10 to 15 hours a day. And it's important that the site is designed so that we can not only sustain that going forward, but again, also make it an even more robust community center than it has been historically. The second theme that has emerged has been flexibility. For my colleagues who've worked in the building over the past decade, they've seen this incredibly rapid change in both our student enrollment and the needs of our students. So just in my time as principal, this is my 7th year as principal, in my first 6 years, our student population grew by 22%. Dr. McIntyre spoke earlier about how we've converted spaces that were not intended to be offices and classrooms into offices and classrooms. Specifically, we've created 17 new classrooms in this building since I've come here without adding a single square foot onto the building. And many of my colleagues that are working in spaces with students that were not designed to be instructional spaces want to make sure that when we open a new building, that the building is designed in a manner that allows it to flex over time. We're working from the assumption that just like this building has served the community for over 40 years, the next building is going to serve the community for over 40 years as well. And to the degree to which a building can be constructed in a manner that allows for flexibility over time, we think that's going to best serve our students in the long run. The third theme that is emerging is related to academic instruction. And this is a recognition that we want to make sure that we have spaces that can meet the contemporary educational needs of our students, as Dr. McIntyre alluded to. One that I want to highlight in particular is education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. My colleagues who teach in English, history, mathematics, and world language, all of these disciplines, instruction can be conducted in non-technical spaces. Basically any place with walls, right? You can put desks and chairs, and you can teach English and history and math and world language. Right? Once we get into science instruction, we need specialized rooms, and we need specialized rooms for the subdisciplines. The needs of a biology classroom and a physics classroom and a chemistry classroom are unique. The needs of an engineering classroom are unique from those core scientific disciplines that I mentioned. Our visual arts programs, our music programs need specialized instructional spaces. And we want to make sure that all of our disciplines that require specialized instructional spaces have specialized instructional spaces that suit their educational needs, because that is not presently the case at Milford High School. We have many teachers who are teaching technical subjects in classrooms that were not even designed to be classrooms. Moreover, they are not outfitted with the types of equipment and technology and design to support the nature of academic instruction in those specialized disciplines. And then the fourth theme that has emerged, and this is a segue into Chapter 74, is that we'd like to see a significant expansion of career and technical education, or I'll use vocational education as shorthand going forward. So we have worked, this community has worked very hard over, I'd say, the past 15 years to expand career and technical education offerings at Milford High School. And in my work here over the past 7 years, I'm very proud of the fact that the community has supported us in making substantial investments to expand career and technical education. It's not enough. 50% of our graduates in the last 2 years went to work after high school. They did not go to college. This is the end of their formal education. There's an urgent moral imperative to have students walking out the door with the skills that are required to be prosperous in the contemporary job market. And we need to make sure that we can provide a robust vocational education to every student who wants and needs and deserves a vocational education so that they can be prosperous after high school. We can provide students with career and technical education in some different forms. Chapter 74 vocational education is the most intensive variety of vocational education that we have here in Massachusetts. In Chapter 74 programs, students are typically doing 3 years of specialized focused coursework in that vocational discipline, and in that 3rd year they're also having a rich field experience outside of the building. So some of our career and technical education today is taking students outside of the building for field-based learning, but that's a very, very tiny percentage of our students that are engaged in career and technical education. Many of our students are experiencing career and technical education as a 2 or 3 semester experience, where it's one class that they're taking maybe over 3 semesters. And so in terms of instructional hours, one class that's full year is approximately 160 instructional hours. And so if a student is taking 2 semesters of technical coursework, that's 160 hours of classroom instruction. 3 is 240 hours. Students in Chapter 74 programs are having 3 full years of instruction in a specialized discipline. And oftentimes the instructional minutes are what we would call double blocked in high school jargon, so that students are spending twice as many instructional hours in that vocational class as they would in one of their conventional academic classes. So that's to say that in a student's 10th grade year, they might be spending 320 hours in technical instruction, another 320 hours in their 11th grade year, and then another 300 plus hours in their 12th grade year that would also include a field-based experience for our students. For our students that are entering the workforce after graduation, again, I want to emphasize, that's 50% of our graduates today. We think that level of intensity is required to prepare them for the demands of the contemporary and future workforce. There are many different areas of vocational education that we think could serve our students well. I would say that my prejudice is leaning towards the vocational disciplines that are the most technical in nature. I believe the more technical the skill set, the more valuable the skill set is going to be on the market. So programs like HVAC, electrical, engineering programs, I have a preference for these programs over, say, culinary arts. And that's not to say that I don't see the value that culinary arts programming can play for our students, but I think that the labor market values those skills in very, very different ways. And I think we have a job to do to try to steer our students towards what we know to be the economic opportunities that are going to provide them with pathways to prosperity going forward. So we have to make a decision as to whether or not we are going to be seeking to add space to the building that can support Chapter 74 program going forward. My hope is that we are going to design a building that can support a much larger scale of career and technical education. It will ultimately be up to the community whether or not we're going to pursue Chapter 74 programming as a means by which to do so. Dr. McIntyre and others can speak a little bit more confidently about some of the financial aspects of Chapter 74, which I believe, generally speaking, would be advantageous to the community because of the reimbursement mechanism that happens with state financing for students under Chapter 74. Representative Murray might be able to speak to that as well. But we are very, very interested in this stage in seeing Milford High School be a high school in the future that has our classical academic programs, but that those classical academic programs are complemented by a really deep and wide slate of technical education offerings. So with that, let me sort of pass it back to Dr. McIntyre, and I'm happy to answer questions on any of those topics at the latter stage of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Allen. So I just want to give you a very broad overview of the whole process, and we're going to be doing a series of these presentations. So I'm not going to get into a ton of detail in the next phases, but I want to give you a sense of kind of what's coming. So there's four main phases of the project. The first is the submission of the statement of interest, which is this little blue square right here, and we're just past that mark in the process. The preparation period or eligibility period is what we're going to enter into on August 1st, and that's the 9 deliverables that we have to do during that 270-day period. The scope definition period is where we form the project, complete the feasibility study, enter into schematic design, and secure funding for the project. And these are very well-regulated processes governed by the MSBA. And there's a number of points in the process where we have to meet with the Board of Governors or another group from the MSBA to kind of say, hey, this is what we're proposing, what do you think? They give us feedback. It's a very iterative process. And the last phase is scope monitoring and building, where the detailed design is completed, construction occurs, shovels are in the ground. There's a closeout audit to make sure that everything that we agreed to do was done. And there's also a post-occupancy evaluation. And we actually served as a test group for the post-occupancy evaluation with the Woodland Project. They kind of tested the process with us, and we gave them feedback on what we thought about the process, and now it's actually part of the embedded MSBA process. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about a couple of those coming up.
Can you just flip me back to that one? I just want to make one
Yeah.
more point here. So we talked about eligibility period, and I think in one of the initial slides, it talked about a 270-day window. We spent a lot of time as soon as we learned that we were accepted, especially Mr. Agajane and I, jumping on how fast we can get stuff ready. And the reason for that is, pardon me, if you don't get this piece done in 270 days, you don't get an extension, you don't get more time, you're out. And you get back in by reapplying. But if we were to lose that 270-day window and we reapply, we could be put on the list lower than other communities that have a higher need, which would push us back another potentially 1, 2, 3, 4 years. You don't know. So
We're 7 or 8 years.
7, 8, it could go a long way. So it's very important that we stay focused, and I think one of the most important pieces of that is communication between us and the community and having these forums. So the next two pieces we're talking about specifically are here. That's okay. The 2 stars. The other thing I was going to talk about that we learned in our initial meeting with the MSBA too is that while this is 270 days, this piece is generally 18 to 24 months. It slows down quite a bit, but I'll touch on now the next 2 pieces. And
you could say beep or something.
Sure, and to why that's going to happen. So we have 2 votes coming up in May at town meeting, and we have to talk about the funds for the feasibility study, which we alluded to could be $2 million, it could be 2.25. We're trying to secure something that makes sure we don't miss the window. And the other vote is on the formation of the school building committee. So the next piece is, this is the definition from the MSBA. I won't read the entire thing, I'll just give you kind of the bullet, the major task that's going to happen here. And essentially what's going to happen is the district's going to work with the MSBA to document a lot of important things, including educational program. They're going to generate an initial space summary, document existing conditions, establish design parameters, and develop and evaluate alternatives. And then there's going to be a recommendation of the most cost-effective and educationally appropriate solution. And now, once all this information gets compiled and put together, that's going to go to the MSBA Board of Directors somewhere around the end of the Module 4 on that last flowchart, and they're going to vote on what is submitted. And they're the ones that are going to give us the final approval to move on in this process, and as Dr. McIntyre said, start putting shovels in the ground and actually start building. So as exciting as it is that we're starting, we're still 3-4 years away from anything getting dug up if we stay on the timetable. So these are the major things that we're going to be focusing on. Obviously, a lot of the questions I've received, Michael's received, I'm sure you guys as well, is are we doing new? Are we renovating? How does all this work? So that's what the experts in the feasibility study are for. They're the ones who can look at this building and tell us if this structure is sound, if it makes sense to do it. They're the ones who can tell us where we could put something. That's simplifying it, obviously. There's a lot into the formula for the reimbursement from the state as well. Recycling pieces of this building are part of that, as Dr. Ottman mentioned, Chapter 74 is part of it as well in terms of a reimbursement rate and also the impact back to the community. So we'll be doing a lot of that, and then again, the reconfiguration of the grade span as well. I know the first 1 or 2 submissions, we did not include the 8th grade. And after further discussion, we decided that might be worth doing. One of the major reasons is, as many of, I'm sure have heard Mr. Correa say, there's a school coming. We can't do 2 in 10 years. And Stacy also needs help, but if we can get a third of the student population out of Stacy, that's going to free up a lot of room over there and give them a little more space to spread out. And there's quite a few towns that do an 8 through 12 mix. I don't want to say mix, that's probably the wrong word. I'm pretty sure they don't mix those kids all together, but they're in the same building and it's a little bit of an easier transition. So it's something that we need to certainly evaluate, and there are people that are well versed in that type of structure as well. So the school building committee is, as Dr. McIntyre said, it's essentially an oversight group that's going to watch and monitor the project. I think it's important to know that this new building project is not a school project. This is not a school committee project. This is a community project. It takes everybody across the board to have insight and to pay attention to this because, as Dr. Odman said, it's a community focal point. It's a community building. It gets used all the time. It's not just for classroom instruction. So it does take on a much greater stake from everybody in the community. So these are the requirements that the MSBA sets forth, and as Dr. McIntyre said earlier, there's specifics about who are supposed to be involved and the requirements of those folks. And I'll give a lot of thanks to Michael Agajanian, because as soon as we were accepted, he jumped all over forming what we're expecting hours to look like and working with legal to make sure that we have everything in line to get this going. So this is minus this last part down here, which we're already crossing out. This is essentially what our makeup is going to look like, and this checks all the boxes according to the MSBA's requirements. This obviously could change between now and mid-May when the town meeting vote happens, but essentially we have people from all aspects of the town. We have people from the high school, we have our facilities director, we have a finance committee, so it's going to be a wide range, and this is an important one down here. There's going to be some members that will be appointed as well, and the goal with Woodland and the goal with us as well that the MSBA really highlights is getting somebody with this experience of architecture, engineering, and construction, somebody that will be able to consume what comes back from those architects and from those design companies, because I don't know about most of you guys, if they hand me some schematic of building structures, I'm going to have absolutely no idea what I'm looking at. So you need somebody who can break that down and double check that as well. So this is an exciting piece. This is part of the vote that we're going for in May. As well as the feasibility study. And again, that's to prepare ourselves. It's a little early. Our window doesn't start until August 1st, but because of the layout of town meeting, we either have May to get these 2 things approved, or we would have a single shot at getting it done at the special town meeting that's usually in October. So it's, I think, better to take that chance now in case we have to come back and have one more swing at it, because if we don't get it done by October, our window's going to close. So
It's questions at this point.
That's
so.
it.
Yeah, so I think we can all just sit and I'll
Yeah.
get questions from the audience. I think you can pick us up. Any questions on any aspect of this process or program? If there's anything we can answer, we'll find it for you.
I always
Yeah, it's good.
have
That's what we're here for.
Go back to the last slide. I'm curious about the school building committee. One area that is not on that list are family members of children who've been through the high school who might be deeply committed to this process, and I was wondering if you could talk about how that didn't make the cut.
I can take that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so, hi, I'm Michael. We put a lot of thought into this, and that's a great question. I'm a parent, I have a daughter in the school system, also on the school committee. So this is the committee, as Kevin said, it's project managing the project and also responsible for all the funds. So town meeting's given the authority to this committee to run with it, right? It doesn't mean that the committee, or the committee should be reaching out to the community to get information, right? So the thought was by putting one, if we put one, I don't know, parent on the board, that's one person, I'd much rather see the committee do a more informal or formal, like survey or reaching out to the community to get, because our community is super diverse, right? Mm-hmm. And so the committee should be reaching out to the community and whatnot, so.
Okay, then on that flow chart, where does that example fit in, like focus groups from the community? Like, how does that fit into the process?
Good.
So the flow chart itself is the steps that the MSBA is requiring us to
Got
complete.
it.
The work that the school building committee is going to be done separately, if you think about how FinCom works or even how the school committee works, they're going to have the authority to say, we want the community to come in and talk to us. We're going to send out surveys to try to gather this information. And these are also voting members.
Mhm.
Those meetings, I believe, those are all open meetings.
They're all open.
And the public is welcome to come and listen. And the discussions we've had and the discussions that we would have with the committee once it's formed as well is that when those discussions come up about the needs of the community or the feedback from parents, that's when you need to invite those people in. When there's a discussion about designing perhaps Chapter 74 sections for HVAC, for example, you need to bring in the experts for those pieces, because this committee is not going to have somebody who understands every single piece of it. So they are open to the public. Anyone can come. Anyone should be able to have an opportunity to share it, and that's my expectation. Obviously, once the committee gets formed and they have some sort of leadership structure, they'll probably come up with that piece, but I will certainly be pushing for as much feedback as possible from everybody.
And if I could just add to that too, like just the educational questionnaire piece, we have 60 staff members who were involved in giving feedback. We've also incorporated a lot of the survey information that we've asked of the community, the staff, into that process as well. So we've sent out a number of surveys throughout the year, and we're incorporating that information into that educational questionnaire process as well. Even though that's not explicitly
Right.
listed on it.
Also be clear, the school building committee is really focused on the physical structure, right? The education plan, the programming really comes from the administration. So the plan that Josh is putting together, that's really going to drive what this committee does. So this committee is not going to be thinking about the education piece. The educators do that, and that drives the whole the plan. So this committee really is an oversight committee. This is not a design committee, if that makes sense. Al?
Yeah.
You're bringing up a fantastic question, because when you look at the building you're in, when we were in the old high school, we never had a pool, but the community strongly pushed the idea that we should have a pool, and we had a generational opportunity. Same thing is happening now. You've got a number of people saying, we'll be doing a school every 8 years, there's 5 schools, so once every 40 years, we get a bite at the high school apple. And a field house is a generational opportunity. So the community drives a lot of it, because let's face it, community pays for it. It's, that's where you're getting all your money. So when enough people say, we want an apple, you gotta listen. Now, how it's built into it is what Michael's saying. The implementation piece will come from this building committee. But the idea, the building committee isn't going to say, we want a field house or we want an apple. The community is. And that's why it's so important to get community support. Plus, they're going to get the bill.
Thanks,
And
Al.
plus immediate follow-up, if I could ask Josh, because you and Matt and Kevin said this repeatedly, this school is not open from 8 to 2 for 180 days. I think everybody needs to think about that first. 8 to 2 for 180 days, that's when you think a school's open. Joshua, is this building open from 8 to 2 for 180 days?
It's
Nope. You got Boy Scouts, you got driver's ed, you have this.
Well,
This
our
school,
swimming group started, I think, 5 in the morning.
this school is open 365 till whatever time at night. This is not just a school. And I know the new school won't be like this either. And for 50 years, this school is not just a school, it's a community building. And you guys have dealt it this way. And Josh is continuing with it just like everyone has done before. There's driver's ed here. I guarantee you, if you walk around right now, there's probably 6 things going on in this building right now. This is a community building. It's a school, absolutely, positively. The primary reason is this is a school. But we don't use it just as a school. We use this as a community building, and you always have. And I know the new building is going to continue that. So So I think everyone in this community needs to realize this isn't just 180 days from 8 to 2. This building is a community building that is used for community functions. And it always will be, because we've done it since this building opened. And like I said, Josh, you know this, at 2 o'clock, do you close the door? No. In the summer, activities, camps, everything. This is a community building, it's not just a school. So when everyone says it's a school department thing, it's not a school department thing. It's a town of Milford thing, is what this building is. And I think people need to realize that when they realize what kind of a project we're doing. This is a town of Milford project, not a school department project.
Tony, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I got two distinctly different questions. One is one slide back, I think about the 8th grade. I've never really heard of that. Is that a common arrangement?
Yeah, so I spent 16 years of my career working in Hudson High School, which is an 8 through 12 school.
Really?
So I have pretty extensive direct experience working in 8 through 12 school. I live in Hopedale. My children go to Hopedale High School, which is a 6 through 12 school. So having 8 through 12, I don't want to give you a number, because I don't know what the number is. But it's not an exceptionally rare thing in the Commonwealth to have an 8 through 12 school. I can share a couple sort of quick points on, I think, what I understand to be some of the kind of common features of 8 through 12 schools. I think most 8 through 12 schools organize 8th grade academics separately from 9 through 12 academics. So you typically have English, math, social studies, and science teachers who just teach 8th graders. And then you have other core academic teachers that just teach 9 through 12. Sometimes there's a little bit of crossover, but many times in 8 through 12 schools, 8th graders are placed on a team structure, similar to a middle school where all the students on Team A share the same 4 core teachers. And so while they're located in the high school, the design of the academic program is more similar to what I think we conventionally find at middle schools. And then on the other side of that, and I think this is maybe one of the great advantages of having an 8 through 12 school, is that 8th graders can access the rich elective offerings that you have in a high school that you typically can't provide in middle school just because of scale issues, right? So we presently have 10 distinct career and technical education sub-disciplines at our school. That's not what you would expect 8th graders to have access to in a middle school. They can't take classes in video production and culinary arts and engineering and robotics and early childhood education and visual arts and performing arts, and I could go on and on. Right? But when the 8th grade is located in the high school, the 8th graders are going to have access to elective offerings in all of those areas of career and technical education. Similarly, 8th graders are now going to have sort of full access to the rich extracurricular offerings at a school. So that's everything from your theater program, your music program, your athletic programs, your clubs. And so I think from the student perspective, there's a lot to be gained when an 8th grader is able to have that 8th grade experience in a high school, because there's going to be many more instructional opportunities available to them during the school day, and there's going to be a much greater array of extracurricular opportunities available to them after the school day. I know that for folks who have not either experienced an 8 through 12 school or they haven't sent their children through an 8 through 12 school, oftentimes I think there's some understandable apprehension about 8th graders being in a building with 12th graders. But in my experience, I have no reservations whatsoever about 8th graders sharing a building with 12th graders. In fact, I think that when 8th graders are able to join the school community in grade 8, particularly for our students that participate in our extracurricular program, and we want to maximize participation in the extracurricular program, I think it can really contribute to a sense of community and ownership and belonging for students when they have a 5-year experience in the building, when they're part of a, really a multi-age community while they're here. So I think what I would share as what can be a challenge of having 8th and 12th graders in the same building is that an 8th grade program by nature is not credit bearing. Right? So the classes that students take in grade 8 are not courses where they're accruing credits that are helping them meet graduation requirements. And that can be, there can be a little bit of tension in sort of co-locating these two academic programs in the school that are working in two fundamentally different ways. But again, I think that that's a tension that is, I don't think it's one that's detrimental for students. I think it's more on the adult side of the house that sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to co-locate two academic programs that function in two fundamentally different ways.
Very interesting.
The other piece, if I can add just one more thing to that, is a lot of the schools that have gone to the 8th grade as part of the high school, a higher percentage of students end up choosing the high school than had done so historically. So like students who would go to private schools or tech schools or other educational opportunities for their high school career, those communities have seen a higher percentage of students stay within the local high school, which has been, that's a nice little bonus.
My second question is more structural. I remember when this building was built, I was actually here, but there was thoughts of going another level up. Is that not a possibility even?
I think everything's a possibility at this point. I don't think we're closing any doors. I think that's going to be part of the feasibility study too. Like we're going to look at all the different options that are potentially on the table.
Because way back when, that was one of the features of it. We could expand. Also, the wings supposedly could go further out. But again, that was 50 years ago.
I've heard those same things, Tony.
When we bring the engineers in, we'll find out.
I heard you could land a helicopter on the roof too.
Maybe that'll be part of the process. Mike, go ahead.
Looking, I guess, into the initial 270-day period, at what step would it be definitively decided whether we go the renovation and addition route or new construction?
So that doesn't happen until we actually do the feasibility study, which is the next phase of the
The
process.
feasibility study
Yeah,
step?
so that would be after the 270 days, that was an 18 to 24 month period.
Yeah,
where
that's
we get that.
that was the step 3 and 4. Feasibility and schematic design are 2 separate steps because they're 2 separate votes, but it's the same package of can you put a second floor on, is your building going to crumble if you try to renovate it, all those answers. So that's all done. That's where that $2.5 potential $1 million for that study, that's what that's paying for, to bring those specialists in. So the first 270 in phase 1, 270 days is just all of the data gathering, and essentially in many ways it's proving to the MSBA that the town is serious, that we're committed, that we're moving forward, and we have all of our details on paper, and then we move on to the more in-depth structural possibilities.
And so we're probably talking like 2 to 2.5, 3 years out before we have that answer.
Okay.
Was that Megan?
Yeah, could you just elaborate kind of a little bit on the timing? I totally understand no two high schools are the same, so I will throw that out there. But start to finish on the construction period, what are you seeing for a typical high school? What's the kind of range?
I think it depends. Like I think new construction is different than like a renovation or a phased renovation, but I think it's probably like 2 years, 2.5 years,
Okay.
maybe 3 years if you're phasing something in.
Got it, thanks.
So like bigger projects take a little bit longer. The rule of thumb is 5 to 7 years. We could be more in that 7 to 8 year period just because it's a pretty big comprehensive item.
Start to finish.
Start to finish,
Yeah, got
yeah.
it. Thanks.
But we're probably talking like 2.5, 3 years for the construction.
I think that's helpful, thanks.
What would stop this from happening?
I think like it's funding, it's the votes from the community, so it's really important that we build that community support. And meetings like this are like a first step to doing that. These projects are, I'll let you guys jump in too.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we got accepted, that's where my mind went. Like, how do we make sure this moves forward, right? So Matt and I went nerd and dug in deep, right? And so we looked at other schools, and because there are schools that get accepted and get kicked out, right? And so what happened? Well, they don't get funding, right? And so this deadline for this May meeting, for this feasibility study and the school building committee, to us was very important because the MSBA, they want to know you're serious, right? And so one of the first things they ask you is, can you get the funding for the feasibility study? Fun fact, Milford has shuttled away money for this already, so we have the money. So we need the vote, right? And so the strategy for us was to, have this vote done in May, so when we start on August 1st, we're not just starting, we're going saying, hey, we've done step 1, we've done step 2, let's go. And then that will hopefully move us to the front of the queue. Now, if we are slow, then we get moved to the back of the queue. If we don't get the funding, then we get kicked out of the queue. So it really comes down to funding. The educational plan as well too. So there's all these little pieces, but the big piece is really funding at first.
In May. So the community needs to vote in May to pay for the
So
feasibility
that's the
study.
first step of the process.
For
First
the
step.
feasibility.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Right, and as Michael said, we have a couple of finance committee members that are here today, and from the very first year, we submitted an application, a statement of interest. The very first year, we spoke with them, and they already said, we have, I believe that the first one was, we have $1.5 million set aside for this. And then we went a couple years and we discussed it, and we saw some more numbers, and it started bumping up. So we've gone from 1.5 to 2.5 to maybe by next week 2.75 to be safe, but the vote is whether or not the community is willing to take the money that's there and use it to determine the next steps. And then there will be another discussion, I'm sure that we'll be having another vote where we'll have the bigger picture of what this is actually going to cost, and then we're going to have to make that determination too, and that's probably 4 years away. So.
And just to be clear, remind that voting means town meeting. Like those
Town
are the
meeting
people that
voting,
we
yes.
need to say we want this to happen. It's not
Right.
school committee. It's town meeting.
That's correct.
Got it.
So what kind of documentation are you providing to town meeting members so
Yeah.
that they're prepared when they show up on May 20th to vote yes?
So we are going to work on that. We are going to work on having not only just stats about where the district stands and what the district needs are, but we're going to have something, I'm hoping to see like maybe a 1-page or something with just the facts of what are necessary to outline this process and what this 2.5 million feasibility study is actually for, and then that'll be part of the presentation, I'm sure, as well.
Matt, can I start one? The other thing I think that's super important, Brenda, is like this building is not going to be free. So should we choose not to do that, this is probably going to cost us more in the long run. And so I think that needs to be part of the conversation we're having. Like things here are going to keep breaking. So like this is sort of critical. So I think that should be an important part of the conversation.
The goal is to have something, both takeaways physically and potentially in the presentation for people to understand. We're not going to just walk up there and say, please say yes. If it was that easy, that'd be great, but I think we owe the entire town meeting the respect of the work and putting in the effort and showing why we need to get moving with this.
Also to remember, the feasibility study is the experts coming in and helping us look at the big picture to get the information to the community, right? So, yeah.
So I might have missed it, but when do you plan on getting that to the town meeting members?
So town meeting, I don't even know the date.
May
It's
20th. May 20th.
May 20th? Okay. So hopefully we can have something that will go out. I was going to talk to the town clerk about whether or not that can be distributed with the packets. If it can't, we will have something physically on the table where you grab the book and the other information is there. But I'm hoping to get it out very soon if we can get that in there. I do have to connect with town hall on that, but the goal is to get it. I personally like having more time to consume stuff even for our bi-weekly meeting. So the sooner the better, so people can raise their questions or at least have their questions ready for when we get there. So.
And then I know you mentioned about getting it out to the community, you said surveys, but what are some of the other, can you say a little bit more about a process to bring community members in?
I think that's something that the building committee should certainly work on, and the school committee will have 3 members on there to push along too. But that's another piece that's still
In the works?
it's not even in the works yet because that's still probably a year away. We have to form the committee first and get through the first 9 steps of phase 1, and then when we get to that next step, that's when the deeper discussions and the more involvement get in there. But for me, forums like this, I think, are almost more helpful. I know surveys electronically, you can touch a whole lot more people, but these conversations are a lot better. So I think that we not only have to have forums here, we need to probably bring them closer to the center of town. We should probably be leveraging our translators and get this to the different communities as well. We need to hear from everybody, and the more communication we have in all forms, I think the better off it's going to go. So there's nothing in the works yet, but that should all be a big focus, I believe, of that building committee.
There's a question in the middle, I think.
Yeah, I just had a question. You had mentioned that there's an option of moving the 8th grade either in or keeping it out. Is there any options for the preschool? Or is that going to remain part of the high school?
I think right now we're looking to keep the preschool as part of the high school complex.
Okay.
This is the plan.
Okay. I didn't know if that was something that would come up in the feasibility study.
I think that's something they're going to look at, because they're going to look at everybody who's in the building, and because like central office is here too, and community use and special education, and I think they're going to look at everybody who's in the complex currently, and then also evaluate the 8th grade.
And also the community that uses this school too, after hours, that are not in here from 5:45 to whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like all the extra.
Yeah, I think that they're looking at the total use of the building.
I would also just point out for community members who may not be aware, but the district is presently housing our family resource center outside of any school district property, renting space downtown. So And that's one other important, a very important unit for our district that could conceivably be located on a new high school campus.
Matt, I think you're right. Having community forums, that's a profound idea, because I can tell you from just listening tonight, the school committee is going to be approached to change the school building committee to add 3 members of the community. I don't know if it'll go through, but when we did this building back in the 70s, how many people did we have that weren't school related?
I was in the 8th grade at that time. No, but traditionally, building committees, I remember the Stacy School, there was a large number of community members on it, so that will bake in the process some of the things that you're talking about.
You know, and again, things like the pool come about because of the community. Nobody ever thought of putting a pool in what we call the old high school, unless it was one of those little Kmart small ones. But that came about, and I don't think anybody would question the value of the pool today. I think for a number of people, the field house is going to be the same issue. It's a generational opportunity. If we do it, I mean, anybody that's been here at night, you wonder why these kids are running up and down the hall. I was told that that's the only place in the winter that long distance runners can practice, is running up and down our halls. And we can do better for our kids. And when you go to places like Shrewsbury and all, and you see what they're offering their children, you sit there and say, we can do better. And that sounds like blasphemy coming from somebody on the FinCom, and it probably is. But again, we took advantage of the opportunity with the pool, and it's paid back in spades. We should really consider doing the same thing. I think having people that aren't, don't take this wrong, Miss Megan, that aren't school committee members, that aren't town FinCom members or whatever, bring a whole different perspective, especially if you can get, we got different communities with the Portuguese community, with the Ecuadorian community. It'd be nice to hear them, and you said it, Brian. If you're not on the committee, your voice is not as loud.
So maybe time for one more question if somebody has something that's like front of mind.
I got a quick one. Where could another school go?
So we just went through this process 8 years ago, or maybe it was 10 years ago with Woodland, and you know, there's very limited options. I think it's unlikely that the high school goes anywhere but somewhere on this property, whether it's a renovation of the current building or a new building, kind of similar to what we did with Woodland, where it's, you know, configured somewhere on the grounds.
On these grounds?
On these grounds here, yeah, yeah.
But not on the turf.
Not on the turf, not on the turf. Ideally. Haven't gone through that process before. I think there's limited options, and I think, you know, there's going to be a big not in my backyard thing for a new high school that potentially serves like 1,300 high schoolers, 300 eighth graders, and another 200 preschoolers. You're talking, you know, 1,800 folks plus another, you know, however many staff members are there.
So we're pretty limited.
You know, I don't want to not be a creative thinker, but I think it's unlikely that they're going to still do their due diligence as part of the process. But there's I forget the street it was on. Where were they looking for? Al, do you remember where they were looking for? Was it Silence?
It's the only other place.
Yeah.
The only place you have with enough dirt is Asylum Street.
Yeah.
And when you think of Asylum Street, 2 things come to mind right away. First of all, if you live on the Medway side of Milford, you better start 3 days early. I mean, all kidding aside, you're adding 40 minutes to every kid's trip. The second thing is, God help you if you live in the universities, because having that much traffic going through all the university streets, and then finally, think of what the buses would do on that major superhighway called Route 140. The dirt's there, you could fit it there, but it's not practical.
So I think it's unlikely it goes anywhere but here, but it's one part of the process that they're going to look at. And I think the fact that we did it during the Woodland process, we'll certainly share that information with the consultants that are brought on to do the feasibility study.
Way back when this building was built, there was a frog pond on West Fountain Street. That was the description of the area, and there were no houses here.
Yeah.
And we used to go parking here too, I might add. That's why most people knew where it was.
Tell me how old you are, or don't tell me how old you are.
And the other thing is, it's a comment about what could
They
stop
said
it.
the lawn.
If you look at the price for a brand-new de novo facility, Tri-County was almost 300 million. The one for Haverhill was proposed at 455. And keep in mind, it's $80 on your tax bill for every million we spend. Think about what that would do to our taxes.
You're not helping the cause, Al. No, but it's going to be a considerable project. There's no question about that. I do want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're going to stick around if you have individual questions and you want to come up and ask anything. This will be the first of many opportunities to engage with the school committee, the building committee, and just understanding the process, because it's multi-step, it's complex, but I have to say it's very well regulated and very well organized by the MSBA. So again, thank you for everybody that came out tonight. We appreciate it. Have a great night.